They figured she was lost. That was the first mistake. The trail through Blackwood State Forest was empty at 6 in the morning, which was exactly why Sergeant First Class Hailey Mercer ran it 3 times a week. No mountain bikers, no families pushing strollers, no one to slow her down or ask questions about the dog keeping pace beside her. A Belgian Malinois named Torch, 72 pounds of coiled muscle and quiet intelligence, his paws hitting the gravel path in perfect rhythm with hers. Torch had been assigned to Hailey 18 months ago, fresh off a deployment in eastern Syria, where he'd cleared 17 structures without a single handler casualty. He'd taken shrapnel to his left rear flank during a vehicle ambush outside Deir ez-Zor, spent 6 weeks in recovery at Lackland Air Force Base, and come back to duty the same way he'd left it, without complaint, without hesitation, without a single unnecessary sound. When Hailey first took his leash, he'd looked up at her with those pale amber eyes, and she'd thought, "This dog has seen things." She understood that look completely. Hailey had done 2 tours with the 75th Ranger Regiment's Intelligence Support Unit before transitioning to a joint task force that officially didn't exist on any Department of Defense organizational chart. She was 31 years old, 5'6", and built like someone who could disappear into a crowd, or walk through a wall, depending on the situation. She had a small scar along her left jawline from a training exercise that went sideways in North Carolina, and a habit of scanning every room she entered before she decided where to sit. This morning, she wasn't thinking about any of that. She was thinking about the 2 miles she still had left, and the coffee waiting for her back at the truck. Torch heard them before she did. The Malinois broke stride first, barely, just a slight forward hitch in his gait, ears pivoting like satellite dishes rotating toward a signal. Hailey felt the leash go taut in her hand, and she slowed without thinking, her body responding to his before her brain had fully processed the input. She scanned the trail ahead. 3 men were standing where the path curved around a stand of pine trees. They weren't hikers. You could tell in about half a second. The body language was wrong, spread out too wide across the trail, arms loose at their sides in that particular way that meant they were comfortable taking up space that didn't belong to them. The one on the left was big, thick through the chest, wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves cut off, despite the morning chill. The one on the right was younger, maybe mid-20s, bouncing a little on the balls of his feet. The one in the middle was the one she paid attention to. He was still, completely still, hands in his jacket pockets, watching her come toward them the way a man watches something he's already decided belongs to him. Hailey didn't slow her pace. Slowing telegraphed hesitation, and hesitation was an invitation. Torch pressed his shoulder against her left leg as they closed the distance. It wasn't a nervous movement. It was positioning. "Morning," she said, keeping her voice even, making eye contact with the one in the middle. "Hey there." The still man smiled. His name, she would learn later, was Creed Holzer, and he had a record in 3 states for armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, and 1 charge that had been dropped due to a witness who'd suddenly developed an extreme reluctance to testify. He had small eyes set close together and a mouth that seemed permanently arranged in the expression of someone who'd just thought of something funny that he wasn't going to share. "You out here all by yourself. Just me and my dog," Hailey said. She stopped at a distance that gave her options and gave Torch room to work if he needed it. "You gentlemen want to let us through?" The big one on the left laughed, a short, wet sound. "Gentlemen." He looked at his companions like she'd said something delightful. "She called us gentlemen, Creed." Creed hadn't stopped looking at Hailey. "Nice dog," he said. "What kind is that?" "Belgian Malinois, military dog." She didn't answer that. "See?" I asked because of the vest. His eyes moved to the tactical harness Torch wore. Low profile, black, no patches. Looks military. Expensive. He tilted his head. "Must be worth something." "We're going to keep moving now," Hailey said. "I don't think so." Creed pulled his hands out of his pockets. His right hand was wrapped around a fixed-blade knife, nothing fancy, the kind you bought at a sporting goods store. He held it down by his thigh, not raised, not threatening yet, just present, the way a statement is present before it becomes an argument. "We like it here. Nice quiet spot. Nobody around for miles." The young one on the right had stopped bouncing. He was looking at Torch with something that tried to be contempt, but landed closer to nervousness. "Put the dog down," he said. "On the ground. Make it sit or whatever." Torch did not sit. He stood completely still beside Hailey's left leg, his amber gaze moving between the three men in a slow, methodical pattern: left, right, middle, left, the way a professional measures a room. Hailey felt the familiar coldness settle into her chest. It wasn't fear. She'd made her peace with fear a long time ago in a basement in Mosul, where the ceiling was low and the air smelled like diesel, and the thing she was afraid of was already behind her. What she felt now was closer to clarity, that particular sharpening of attention that happened when the world contracted down to distances and angles, and the precise calculation of what was going to need to happen next. "I'm going to tell you this once," she said. Her voice hadn't changed. Calm, conversational, the same tone she might use to ask someone to pass the salt. "Put the knife away and walk back the way you came, all three of you." Creed's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Lady, there's three of us and one of you. That dog isn't going to." "The dog isn't my concern right now," Hailey said. "You are." That landed differently than he expected. She could see it in the way his smile flickered. People expected fear. They planned around fear. They calibrated their whole approach around the assumption that a woman alone on a trail at dawn would give them what they wanted because the alternative was incomprehensible. The big one moved first. He came from the left, reaching for Torch's harness. Not the knife, not her, but the dog. It was supposed to be a control move, she understood that. Take the dog, neutralize the threat, then deal with the woman. It was tactically logical if your frame of reference was intimidating civilians who would fold the moment their dog was in danger. His hand closed on the harness handle. Torch's response was instantaneous and surgical. He pivoted on his back legs and bit down on the man's forearm with the focused, deliberate precision of an animal that had trained for exactly this scenario. Not a panic bite, not a warning bite, a controlled apprehension that locked his jaw at the pressure point between the radius and ulna and didn't let go. The big man screamed. The sound ricocheted off the pine trees and went nowhere. Hailey was already moving. She came in low toward Creed before he could process what was happening behind him. The knife hand was the priority. She caught his wrist with both hands, stepped inside his reach, the way her ranger instructor had drilled into her approximately 10,000 times, and applied the kind of force to his wrist joint that the human body is not designed to resist. The knife hit the gravel path with a sound like a dropped coin. Creed was bigger than her by a significant margin. It didn't matter. Size was a lever, and levers worked in both directions, and everything she'd learned in 7 years of close-quarters training was precisely about redirecting the kind of force that bigger people brought to a situation. She used his own forward momentum to fold him down toward the ground, one knee between his shoulder blades. His knife arm twisted up behind his back, at an angle that made further resistance physiologically inadvisable. "Don't," she said quietly, because he was still trying to push up with his free hand. He stopped. The young one, the one who'd been bouncing on his feet, made a sound she couldn't quite categorize and took 2 steps back. He looked at his companions, one of them face down in the gravel with a woman's knee on his back, the other one on his knees with his arm still locked in a Malinois' jaw, waiting for a command to release. His hand went to his waistband. "Torch," Hailey said. "Just the name. Not a command, not a direction." The dog's head turned toward the young man. 72 pounds of Belgian Malinois, already blood-warm from a morning run, made direct eye contact with him from 12 feet away. The amber eyes were completely without aggression and completely without mercy, which was somehow worse. The young man's hand came away from his waistband empty. He raised both palms to shoulder height. Smart, Hailey thought. The first smart decision any of them had made this morning. She kept her weight on Creed's back and looked at the young man steadily. "Phone," she said. "Left hand. Unlock it and set it on the ground in front of you." He did it. "Call 911, she said. "Tell them your location on the Blackwood East trailhead and ask them to send units." His voice shook when he talked to the dispatcher. That was fine. Shaking voices still transmitted the necessary information. Creed tried once more to shift beneath her, a subtle test, exploring whether her weight distribution had changed. It hadn't. "You made a mistake," he said into the gravel. His voice was controlled, like he was working to keep it that way. "You have no idea. I know exactly what I'm dealing with," Hailey said. Creed Holzer, 43 years old. 3 priors in Texas, Louisiana, and New Mexico. The Louisiana case was a robbery at a gas station off I-20, and the witness who didn't testify was a 58-year-old woman named Delors. She let that sit for a moment. "I know more about you than your parole officer does." The silence that followed was different from the previous silences. Deeper, more complicated. "Who are you?" he said. Hailey didn't answer right away. She could hear sirens now, distant, threading through the trees from the direction of the highway. The young man was still standing with his hands up, looking at Torch, who was looking back at him with that same steady patience. The big one had stopped struggling entirely. Torch held. "Release," she said. Torch released the big man's arm, stepped back 2 paces, and sat. Clean, precise, like a period at the end of a sentence. The big man cradled his arm against his chest and didn't get up. The sirens were closer now. Blue light began to strobe through the tree line in the direction of the parking lot, fracturing the early morning light into pieces. Hailey stood, keeping her boot on the back of Creed's knee rather than his spine, still controlling, less likely to cause long-term injury, which mattered less to her morally than it did legally and professionally. She reached down, retrieved the knife from the gravel, and held it by the blade between 2 fingers. "You're going to want to have your hands visible when they come around the corner," she said. "Don't make any sudden movements. The dog will not give you a warning the second time." 3 patrol cars came down the trailhead access road with a 4th following behind. The 4th car was an unmarked black SUV. The uniformed deputies handled the 3 men with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this specific thing enough times that it no longer required active thought. Zip ties, verbal commands, methodical. The 2 people who got out of the black SUV were not deputies. They wore civilian clothes. 1 woman, 1 man, both in their early 40s, both with the particular flat quality of attention that Hailey associated with people who spent their careers looking for things most people didn't know to look for. The woman reached her first. She had short dark hair and a badge on her belt that she flashed briefly without announcing which agency it represented. She looked at Hailey, then at Torch, then at the scene in front of her, with the expression of someone confirming a hypothesis they'd already formed. "Sergeant Mercer," she said. "Agent Carver," Hailey said. They had met 8 months ago in a conference room in Crystal City, Virginia, during a joint briefing that had involved 3 different agency acronyms and a map of Central American shipping routes that was not meant to leave the building. Hailey had known then that whatever Carver's task force was tracking, it was moving faster than the agencies could keep up with. "You want to tell me why you were running this trail this morning?" Carver asked. Hailey looked at her steadily. "Because I like to run in the morning." Carver looked back. "Aha." The male agent. Hailey didn't know him. She'd remember if she'd met someone with a jaw that squared off and a haircut that institutional. Was talking to the deputies near the patrol cars, gesturing toward the 3 men now seated on the ground in zip ties. After a moment, he separated from the group and walked back toward Carver, pulling a folded document from his jacket. "The big one's phone," he said, handing it to Carver. He didn't have time to clear it. Carver looked at the screen. Something in her expression changed. A tightening around the eyes, the careful stillness of someone controlling a reaction. She turned the screen toward Hailey. It was a photograph of a woman running on a trail, taken from a distance, through trees. The woman in the photograph was wearing a black jacket and running with a Malinois. The photograph had been taken 3 days ago. They weren't random, Carver said. It wasn't a question. No, Hailey agreed. You knew that. Hailey looked at the photograph for another moment, then handed the phone back. I suspected it after the second time I noticed the same truck parked at different trailheads in the same week, different license plates. Same truck. Carver studied her face. You could have called us. I did call you. I sent a report through the secure channel on Tuesday. I didn't get a response. The male agent, who Carver introduced finally as Agent Desmond Pritchett, had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. There was a backlog, he said. Hailey didn't say anything to that. Some things didn't need commentary. Creed Holzer, Carver said, glancing back toward the patrol cars, is connected to a man named Warren Tull. Tull has been under investigation for 9 months for running a contraband network through state forest access roads, Forest Service land, minimal law enforcement presence, perfect for moving product off the main freight routes. What we didn't know, she paused, what we didn't know until this morning was that Tull had started targeting specific individuals, federal personnel, people attached to cases that intersect with his operation. Hailey absorbed this. You think they were going to use me to get to the investigation? Leverage, Pritchett said. It's worked before. Not with the individuals, they thought, but with their families. He glanced at Torch. Or their partners. The word settled in the cool morning air. Hailey looked at Torch. The Malinois was sitting beside her left knee, tracking the activity around the patrol cars with professional attention, his amber eyes moving in that slow, methodical pattern, left, middle, right, middle, left. He had a small blood smear on his muzzle from the bite. He was otherwise composed, unhurried, waiting for whatever came next with the patient certainty of an animal that had long since made peace with the fact that whatever came next, he would handle it. She reached down and laid her hand on the top of his head. He leaned slightly into her palm. Just slightly. The thing about Torch, the thing that nobody who hadn't worked with a dog like him could fully understand, was that his intelligence wasn't the performing kind. He didn't do tricks. He didn't show off. He simply assessed everything around him with a clarity that most humans spent their whole lives trying to achieve. And he responded to what was actually there rather than what he feared might be there. In 7 years of military and law enforcement work, Hailey had met maybe 4 humans she could say the same about. How do you want to handle the statement? Carver asked. Honestly, Hailey said. 3 individuals attempted to obstruct a federal officer and threaten a military working dog. The officer and dog responded appropriately. She looked at Carver. Unless there's a reason you need something more complicated than that. There's a reason I need something much simpler than that, Carver said, with the tone of someone who had been explaining operational security to people who didn't want to hear it for approximately 20 years. Your name doesn't appear in the report. Torch's designation doesn't appear in the report. 3 individuals are arrested for assault on a trail in Blackwood State Forest by officer responding to a 911 call. Full stop, and Tull? We've been building the case for 9 months, Pritchett said. We're not blowing it for a leverage attempt that failed. We let these 3 sit in county while we work the connection back up the chain. Tull doesn't know this didn't work the way it was supposed to. Hailey thought about that. There were arguments against it. The kind of arguments she'd been making inside institutional walls for 7 years with mixed results. The argument that letting people who just put a blade in her direction walk back into the system without consequence wasn't justice. The argument that the clean version of a case was usually the version that protected the institution, not the individual. She'd seen that trade-off made often enough that she'd stopped expecting it to feel good. What she had learned, slowly, expensively, across deployments and debrief rooms and conversations in parking garages that never made it into any official report, was the difference between what she could control and what she couldn't. She couldn't control how the agencies used the information she handed them. She couldn't control whether the report filed matched the one she gave. She couldn't control Warren Tull or the 9-month timeline or the institutional backlog that had buried her Tuesday warning. She could control this moment, this trail, the 3 men in zip ties who had looked at a woman with a dog and seen something manageable. Torch looked up at her. His amber eyes were very calm. "Fine," she said to Carver. "Handle it the way you need to handle it." Carver nodded. "We're going to need you to come in for a formal debrief this afternoon. Crystal City, same building. I know the building." Carver started to turn, then stopped. "One more thing." She looked at Torch again, a long look, the kind that meant something. "Holzer said something to the deputy when they were putting him in the car," he said. She paused as if deciding whether it was worth repeating. "He said he didn't understand. He said she was just out there running, no backup, no radio, nothing. He said he didn't understand why she wasn't scared." Hailey looked down at Torch. Torch looked back up at her. "Tell him," Hailey said quietly, "that I had everything I needed." Carver absorbed that. She had the expression of someone filing away a line for future use. "All right," she said, and walked back toward the black SUV, already pulling out her phone. Pritchett followed. The deputies were finishing their processing by the patrol cars. The morning light had fully broken through the pine canopy now, painting long gold lines across the gravel path. Somewhere deeper in the forest, a woodpecker was working on something, entirely unconcerned. Hailey clipped Torch's leash back to his harness, a habit, not a necessity. He didn't need the leash on this trail. He never had. She did it because it was their agreement, the visible sign of a partnership that went too deep for anyone watching from the outside to fully read. She turned back up the path, away from the patrol cars and the black SUV, and the particular bureaucratic gravity of people with clipboards deciding how to narrate a morning. Torch fell into step beside her, left shoulder at her left knee, his paws on the gravel in that steady, unhurried rhythm. 2 miles left to the truck, coffee waiting. The trail curved around the stand of pine trees, the same curve where 3 men had been standing 20 minutes ago making their calculations, and came out into a long, straight stretch dappled with early light. Hailey ran. Torch ran. The forest settled back around them the way forests do, indifferent and old, closing over the morning the way water closes over a stone. They didn't talk about it afterward. Dogs and their handlers rarely did. The moment had been what it was, and they had both been exactly what they needed to be inside it, and that was the whole of the accounting. By the time they reached the trailhead parking lot, the patrol cars were gone. The black SUV was gone. The access road was empty in both directions. Hailey opened the tailgate of her truck. Torch jumped up without being asked. He knew the routine, and curled into his travel kennel with the neat economy of motion that was characteristic of everything he did. She latched the door and he looked at her through the mesh, amber eyes steady. She thought about what Carver had said, what Creed Holzer, face down in the gravel with a woman's knee on his back, had said to the deputy in the car. He didn't understand why she wasn't scared. She got in the driver's seat and sat for a moment before starting the engine. The truth was more complicated than afraid or not afraid. The truth was that she had been, at some point along the way, afraid of enough things that the specific fear of 3 men on a trail had simply run out of room. 7 years, 2 continents, deployments that still visited her at 3 in the morning. You didn't come out the other side of all that fearless. That was a myth people told because the real thing was harder to explain. What you came out the other side with was something more useful. You came out with a dog who knew exactly what he was and what he was for, who leaned into your hand without needing you to explain it, who could be present in a moment of danger with the same clean attention he brought to every other moment of the day, because he had never learned to compartmentalize courage the way humans did. You came out with the ability to stand on a gravel path at 6 in the morning and know, with the certainty that came from having done the work, from having paid the price, from having learned, on grounds that didn't allow for the luxury of doubt, exactly what you were capable of. Creed Holzer, lying face down in the gravel, had looked up at her and asked, "Who are you?" She started the engine. Behind her, in the kennel, Torch settled his chin on his paws and closed his eyes, patient as stone, easy in the way of things that have never needed to perform what they are. The truck pulled out of the parking lot onto the access road, heading toward the highway. She already knew the answer to his question. She'd just decided it wasn't something she owed him.